thing that we know, but what I can share with you, when combined with what all of us have learned over the years, is deeply troubling. What you will see is an accumulation of facts and disturbing patterns of behavior. The facts in Iraq's behavior demonstrate that Saddam Hussein and his regime have made no effort to disarm as required by the international community. Indeed, the facts and Iraq's behavior show that Saddam Hussein and his regime are concealing their efforts to produce more weapons of mass destruction.
Let's talk about lying, specifically international lying made by politicians and our leaders. If you are new here, welcome. My name is Osama. I'm a pharmacist working in England, and today I thought I would do something a bit different. So, as much as I like pharmacy, sometimes I do like to talk about other things and other topics and subjects. So today I thought I would talk about lying. So I know it sounds a bit strange, but the inspiration for this whole topic came about from a lecture that I saw by the renowned political scientist John Mearsheimer. So you might have come across this guy because he's done quite a bit of work around the Ukraine conflict, and I suggest you go and watch some of his lectures because they're absolutely fantastic. But I came across a lecture that he did about the subject of international lying by leaders and politicians, and this was actually a lecture that he delivered around his book called Why Leaders Lie. So I thought it would be a really interesting topic to talk about. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put the link to the original lecture from YouTube in the description, and I have also written an article about this whole subject based on his lecture on my website, which I will also link in the description, so go and have a look at those. So let's get into it. So I'm going to try my best to summarize the main findings of the lecture. Number one, lying makes strategic sense. So there's two different types of lies. There is selfish lying, which benefits the politician or the leader, and there is strategic lying, which benefits the state. In the lecture, Professor Mearsheimer says that lying or strategic lying is a useful tool of statecraft, and this video mainly deals with strategic lying. And then in the lecture he goes on to describe that there are two different types of lies. So you have strategic lying and noble lying. So with strategic lying, an example would be the Gulf War in 2003, where the lie was made about Iraq so as to benefit the leader's country. And then you have some lies that he calls noble lies. And these noble lies are lies which, they're sort of like a white lie, where a lie is being told so as to prevent a bigger crisis from happening. So a really amazing example that he gives in the lecture is the Cuban Missile Crisis. So I didn't know this, but the only reason that the USSR removed their missiles from Cuba was because they did a reciprocal deal with the United States, where the United States would remove their Jupiter missiles from Turkey. So President Kennedy didn't tell the public about this, and it was made out that the USSR was in fact the aggressor and was forced into a humiliating climb down. And then the third point that he makes is that there are 5 different types of international lying. Number one, first type of international lying is called interstate lying. So an example of this is, or should I say, actually let me backtrack. Interstate lying is when a leader of one country lies to the leader of another country. So an example of this was the USA and the USSR again during the Cold War, where should the USSR invade Europe, the Americans told the Soviets that they would use nuclear weapons to defend Europe. Years later, it turns out actually that wasn't the case. The United States had no intention of using nuclear weapons to defend Europe, because as bad as Europe getting invaded was, the threat of an all-out nuclear war was actually worse. So it was just a lie that was used as a preventative action or as a deterrent to the USSR from carrying out that action. Obviously, that lie worked and World War III didn't happen. Number 2 type of international lie is fear-mongering. So this one is pretty straightforward, and again, a sobering recent example was again the Gulf War in 2003, where the threat of weapons of mass destruction from Iraq was completely exaggerated, way out of what was reasonably perceived to be the threat from Iraq at that time. And the fear-mongering was needed because the public at large didn't want the war, so they had to use the fear-mongering to sell the war to the public. Number 3, strategic cover-ups. So again, the case of the Cuban Missile Crisis is an excellent example of a strategic cover-up lie. Number 4, nationalist myth-making. So this is when a country lies about its past and makes itself out to be better or morally superior than what the actual history suggests. And lastly, liberal lies. So the example that they used of this was Bomber Harris in World War II, when they had the very large bombing campaign of Germany. The British public were lied to. They were told that industrial targets were being bombed when in fact civilian targets were being bombed. So that's an example of a liberal lie. Towards the end of the lecture, he describes the 2 main findings that he made in his book. So number 1, interstate lying is quite rare. So what that means is that the leader of one country rarely lies to the leader of another country, because countries rarely trust each other, so it's very hard to lie to another country. But the second more shocking finding is that leaders are much more likely to lie to their own domestic audiences, because their own domestic audiences trust them more, so they're actually easier to trick and lie to. And then towards the end of the lecture, he describes the 2 main downsides of international lying. First one is blowback. So that's when a leader starts off by lying about international or foreign affairs, but then seeps that into lying about domestic affairs. So what happens is that when the public sort of realise that they've been lied to, whether it's foreign or domestic affairs, the more of this lying that occurs, the more distrust of the political system occurs. So it makes the political system more unstable. And the second downside of international lying is backfiring. So that's when, again with the Gulf War, that the lie was successfully executed and the public were sort of duped into the war, but following the execution of the lie, the actual campaign that they got off the back of that lie was a disaster. So we all know that the Iraq War was a complete disaster, despite the fact that they managed to sell the war to a dubious public. The ramifications and the fallout from the war was just a disaster. Probably the most shocking finding of all this, and the most shocking statement that Professor Mearsheimer makes in the lecture towards the end, is that the societies that lie the most and fearmonger the most isn't dictatorships, it's actually democracies. And that's actually quite a depressing pill to swallow, quite a depressing truth. So in conclusion, where does this leave us? I think next time your politician or leader stands up on TV and makes some sort of bold statement, especially when it's related to foreign policy, I would take that with a pinch of salt and actually question whether that statement is sincere or not. So I think we just have to accept that lying is part and parcel of politics. And if we accept that, when we find out later on down the line that we have been lied to, maybe we will not be as upset. So it's a bit of a bitter pill to swallow, but I think unfortunately this is the nature of international politics and even domestic politics. Anyway, I hope you found that useful. It's just something a little bit different, just something that I wanted to get off my chest and make. I will be going back to making pharmacy videos, so don't worry about that. But let me know what you think about this, something a bit different. You know, I like to get out of my comfort zone a little bit, you know, try and tackle subjects that are a bit more controversial, a bit more edgy. You know, let me know what you think. Thanks very much for watching. See you next time.